Hello and welcome. Tonight I'll be reading you a cozy autumn tale, a story of 3 witches, a crooked little cottage at the edge of the woods, and the adventures that begin with falling leaves, flickering lanterns, and the smell of pumpkin spice drifting through the air. It's a story full of warmth and whimsy, where the fire crackles softly, the country lanes are lined with golden trees, and magic hums gently in the background, like a secret waiting to be discovered. The witches you're about to meet are not frightening or fearsome, but funny, clever, and full of quirks, each with their own way of muddling through autumn days and peculiar adventures. So settle in, get comfortable. Let the sound of turning pages and falling leaves carry you gently into the world of this story. Close your eyes if you'd like, and let's step together into a cozy October evening where every pumpkin glows, every cobblestone whispers, and magic lingers in the autumn air. Chapter 1: Pumpkins, Pies, and Pointy Hats. The cottage at the edge of the woods was not the sort of place you stumbled upon by accident. It had a way of hiding itself from uninvited guests. Travellers passing down the back road might see only a tumble of brambles and a tangle of oak trees, unless they had business with the witches within. But for those who knew where to look, the house revealed itself like a secret shed. Its crooked chimney leaned cheerfully against the autumn sky, puffing smoke that smelled faintly of nutmeg. The roof was tiled with moss as much as slate, and the wooden shutters had been painted so many times, orange, green, blue, back to orange, that they looked like patchwork quilts. The front garden was a riot of autumn splendour. Pumpkins clustered in fat orange heaps, marigolds glowed in earthenware pots, and bundles of drying cornstalks rattled softly in the breeze. Strings of dried apples and cranberries hung like garlands from the porch, swaying gently whenever a magpie landed to investigate. Rowena Crowsfoot, the eldest witch, insisted the garden looked tastefully seasonal. Thistle Quickwick, the youngest, said it looked like a hedgehog sneezed in a harvest festival. Hazel Nettlebed, the middle witch, only smiled and said it was cozy, which she believed was the highest compliment one could pay anything. Inside, the house was an even more comforting chaos. The great stone hearth dominated the kitchen, its mantel cluttered with jars of herbs, candle stubs, and an alarming number of spoons. Above it, an iron cauldron hung, perpetually full of something bubbling. Sometimes soup, sometimes potion, sometimes an odd mixture of the two. Shelves sagged under the weight of cookbooks, spellbooks, and notebooks, labelled things like Rowena's Important Theories, Volume 12, or Hazel's Recipes That Went Wrong, Do Not Touch. The smell of cinnamon seemed baked into the very walls. Cats wandered in and out as though they paid rent, though nobody was quite sure whose cats they actually were. At the wooden table, Hazel was busy knitting what looked like a scarf long enough to circle the moon twice. Balls of yarn rolled about like tumbleweeds. Rowena was sharpening quills with the seriousness of someone preparing for war. And Thistle was attempting to charm an apple into peeling itself, which resulted in the fruit hopping off the table and rolling indignantly into a corner. "Hazel," Rowena said sharply, as the hedgehog sneezed in the sugar bowl. "This is the third creature this week. We've already had a crow in the bread bin and a squirrel in the teapot. Why is there a hedgehog in the sugar?" "He looked cold," Hazel protested, carefully retrieving the prickly offender. "And besides, everyone deserves a little sweetness." The hedgehog sneezed again, scattering sugar like snow. Thistle clapped her hands. "Marvellous! A hedgehog who makes sugar storms. Can we keep him?" "No," Rowena snapped. "We are not adopting every woodland creature that sneezes." Hazel carried the hedgehog to the fireside basket, cooing softly. "There, there. Ignore her. She doesn't mean it." "I do mean it," Rowena muttered, glaring at her quill like it had personally offended her. At that moment, Thistle came barging back in from outside, dragging her broom behind her and dripping leaves all over the rug. "There's a goblin caravan down on the back road," she announced, breathless with excitement. "They've set up a whole market. Scarves, charms, candied toadstool. One of them had a cat that told me I ought to wash my boots. Imagine." "Imagine indeed," said Rowena, eyeing the clumps of mud now decorating the floor. Thistle ignored her. "We should go. Maybe buy something. Maybe cause something." Her eyes gleamed with that dangerous energy of hers. Hazel's ears perked at the word candied. "Candied toadstools, you say? Oh, those would look marvellous on a cake." "They'd look marvellous sending you to the healer," Rowena replied briskly. "Absolutely not." But no. Despite Rowena's objections, a few hours later, the three witches were tramping down the country back road. The lane curved lazily through the countryside, bordered on each side by hedgerows so heavy with berries they seemed ready to burst. The trees arched overhead in flaming shades of gold and crimson, their leaves drifting down like fiery confetti. The air was crisp, carrying the mingled scents of damp earth, wood smoke, and the faint sweetness of apples left to rot beneath orchard trees. Hazel stopped every few steps to sigh happily and exclaim, "Oh, isn't it beautiful?" She tucked acorns into her pockets and handed out crumbs of scone to passing crows. Thistle darted ahead, leaping into piles of leaves with gleeful abandon. Each time she jumped, the leaves erupted around her in a shower of colour, and she looked as delighted as if she'd discovered treasure. Rowena marched along at a brisk pace, muttering to herself about irresponsible goblins and mud on the rug and what happens when sugar hedgehogs multiply. At one point, Hazel paused to admire a particularly vivid scarlet leaf. "Do you suppose the trees know how splendid they look?" she asked dreamily. "Of course they do," Thistle replied, stuffing leaves into her satchel. "They're showing off. I'm stealing a few for my collection." Rowena threw her hands up. "One day you'll bring home something cursed, and then where will we be? Probably turned into newts." Hazel smiled serenely. "Well, newts are rather sweet." By the time they reached the town of Bramblewick, the cobbled streets were glistening from a recent drizzle. Shop windows glowed with lamplight, displaying shelves of bread loaves still steaming from the oven, jars of golden honey, strings of bright lanterns, and woolen scarves in every shade of autumn. Children raced through the square, clutching conkers on strings, shrieking with laughter. A fiddler played outside the tavern, his music spilling into the misty air. The whole town seemed alive with the kind of warmth that comes only in autumn, a cheerfulness that burned all the brighter because of the chill in the wind. Hazel clasped her hands. Oh, it's all so lovely. Look at the lanterns. Oh, look at those pies. Oh, the smell. Thistle darted to a stall and immediately began examining a cage of glowworms. I need these, she declared. You need nothing, Rowena said firmly, tugging her away by the collar. At the far end of the square loomed the library, squat and welcoming. Its door was carved with curling oak leaves, and its windows glowed with firelight. Inside, rows of leather-bound books stretched into shadows, and the smell of old paper and beeswax polish lingered in the air. Chairs with embroidered cushions were scattered invitingly beside the hearth. Hazel sighed contentedly at the sight. We must go in, just for a little while. There might be new cookbooks. There might be cursed cookbooks, Rowena corrected. Thistle grinned. Or spell books. Maybe one on summoning dragons. We are not summoning dragons, Rowena snapped. Maybe just a small one? Thistle asked hopefully. But Hazel was already pushing open the heavy oak doors, the golden light spilling out onto the cobbles like a promise. And so the three witches stepped into the library and into the very beginning of their next misadventure. Chapter 2. Goblins, Gossip, and Gooseberry Tarts. The Bramblewick Library was, as Hazel Nettlebed declared with misty eyes, a temple to all things cosy. Dust motes danced like fairies in the golden light, and the fire in the hearth crackled as though pleased to see them. Shelves towered up to the ceiling, heavy with tomes that smelled of secrets, while ladders on wheels stood ready for the brave souls who wished to reach the very top. A large ginger cat occupied the most comfortable armchair, glaring at anyone who so much as thought about sitting down. Smells like wisdom, Hazel whispered reverently, running her hand over the spines of the books. Smells like mildew, Rowena muttered, pulling a suspicious volume entitled The Complete History of Goose, whispering from the shelf. It was written entirely in honks. Thistle, meanwhile, had vanished into a shadowy corner and reappeared moments later, grinning like a fox with a stolen chicken. Look, she whispered loudly, holding up a book. 50 spells to alarm your neighbours. Put that back, Rowena said, but it has diagrams. Thistle flipped a page to show a complex illustration of a cauldron erupting with purple smoke and chickens. No. Thistle sighed dramatically and slid the book back into place. You're no fun. Hazel, who had gathered a stack of cookbooks so tall she could barely see over it, trundled past like a determined mushroom. They've got a new section on enchanted baking. Did you know you can make a pie that sings lullabies? I'd rather have one that stays quiet and edible, Rowena replied. The witches might have spent the rest of the afternoon happily arguing over books, had not a sharp clanging sound rung out from the square outside, the distinctive noise of goblin traders hammering their wares onto tables. Thistle's eyes lit up. The goblins! Come on. Rowena groaned, but Hazel was already following, her arms full of cookbooks, her spectacles slipping down her nose in excitement. The goblin market was a sight to behold. Dozens of stalls had sprung up like mushrooms after rain, each covered in patchwork cloths and glowing lanterns. Goblins in bright scarves and jangly earrings shouted over one another, waving strange objects. Teapots shaped like dragons, pocket watches that ticked backwards, scarves that wriggled as though they didn't particularly want to be scarves. The smell of fried dough, roasted chestnuts and something faintly sulphurous hung in the air. roll up, cried one goblin in a hat with 3 peaks. Get your candied toadstools. Guaranteed only mildly poisonous. Charm your neighbours, alarm your enemies, bellowed another, brandishing jars of glowing insects. A third leaned over to Rowena with a conspiratorial grin. Handcrafted broom polish, madam. Guaranteed to make your broom fly straighter, faster, and with 30% fewer unexpected loop-the-loops. Rowena sniffed. My broom does not loop the loop. Really? Thistle said innocently. What about last Tuesday, when you ended up in the duck pond? That was a crosswind, Rowena said firmly. Hazel, meanwhile, was utterly distracted by a stall covered in pastries and pies, all gleaming under glass domes. Oh my, she murmured. Gooseberry tarts, blackberry crumbles. Is that? Oh heavens, they've got pumpkin turnovers. The goblin baker grinned, showing far too many teeth. Special today, missus. Buy 2 pies, get a cursed scone free. Oh, I couldn't possibly, Hazel began, then brightened. Well, it is a bargain. Rowena snatched her purse away. Absolutely not. We don't eat goblin baking. Do you remember what happened last time? Hazel winced. The jam did sing at us. Exactly. Thistle had already wandered to a stall selling jars of bottled weather. She held one up, a swirling storm cloud rattling with tiny lightning bolts. Can I have this one? I'll only open it indoors occasionally. Rowena's voice grew thin with exasperation. No. The 3 witches bustled through the stalls, half arguing, half admiring, until they reached the far end of the market. There, a stall stood apart from the rest, draped in dark green velvet. Behind it sat an ancient goblin with spectacles perched on the end of his long nose. On his table rested only one object, a book bound in cracked leather, with a clasp shaped like an oak leaf. Hazel tilted her head. Oh, that looks rather ordinary. Thistle leaned closer. Ordinary things are the most suspicious. Can we buy it? Rowena narrowed her eyes at the goblin. And what? exactly does that do?" The goblin smiled slowly. "That, madam, is a storybook, but not just any storybook. Whoever opens it finds themselves drawn into its tale, a grand adventure waiting to be lived." Hazel gasped. "Oh, how wonderful! Like stepping into a fairy tale." Thistle clapped her hands. "Yes, let's do it. Let's jump into a book and fight dragons and eat enchanted pies." Rowena folded her arms. "Absolutely not. We are not." But before she could finish, the ginger cat from the library trotted into the square, leapt onto the table, and pressed a paw firmly onto the book's clasp. With a soft click, the book opened, and a rush of golden leaves swirled out into the air like a storm. The witches clutched at their cloaks as the pages turned on their own, and suddenly the ground beneath them shifted, and Bramblewick Square vanished. The world spun. Or perhaps it was the pages that spun. Or perhaps, as Thistle shrieked gleefully, everything spun. Golden leaves whirled around them, and scraps of parchment fluttered past like startled birds. Sentences drifted through the air as though someone had upended a dictionary. "Once upon a time, happily ever after." And then the pumpkin exploded. Hazel flapped her arms helplessly. "Rowena, we're falling. Do something." "I am doing something," Rowena shouted, clinging onto her hat. "I'm panicking in a dignified manner." Thistle, meanwhile, was cartwheeling through the air like she'd just won a prize. "Whee! This is brilliant." Hazel caught hold of a particularly large word, consequence, and clung to it like a floating log. "I don't like this at all. My spectacles keep fogging up." Rowena tried to grab onto a parson's seriousness, but it slipped through her fingers. Where is the blasted ground? There's usually ground. Ground is important. "Maybe there isn't one," Thistle shouted cheerfully, sailing past on the back of an adventure. "Maybe we'll just float forever." "Oh, wouldn't that be cozy?" "Cozy," Hazel shrieked. "This is not cozy, Thistle Quick. This is most emphatically not cozy." Something very large and very book-shaped flipped over above them, sending a gust of wind that smelled faintly of ink and gooseberry pie. Hazel's knitting needles clattered past like startled sparrows. Rowena's quill stabbed itself into an enormous comma. Thistle tried to catch a flying mischief, missed, and got walloped in the face by a passing destiny. "Oh, splendid," Rowena muttered. "We're being beaten senseless by punctuation." The golden storm thickened, swirled, and then, with the rude abruptness of a door slamming shut, the world gave a final whoosh and spat them out. They landed in a heap. Chapter 3. A Village Not Quite Their Own. The witches groaned and untangled themselves. Rowena extricated her shawl from Hazel's knitting. Hazel retrieved her spectacles from Thistle's hair, and Thistle announced proudly that she'd found a frog in her boot, which she was absolutely keeping. They had landed in what looked, at first glance, like a village. There were cottages with thatched roofs, cobbled lanes, and the smell of wood smoke curling from chimneys. The air was crisp and bright, the way it often is in stories. But there was something off. The cottages were a little too neat, like children's blocks stacked in perfect rows. The trees' autumn leaves glowed a little too brightly, as though painted freshly for the occasion. And in the village square, a group of villagers stood perfectly still, frozen mid-wave, as though waiting for someone to tell them what to do next. Hazel frowned. Oh dear, I think we might be in a story. You don't say, Rowena muttered, pulling leaves from her hair. The sky being made entirely of paper wasn't a clue. Thistle, however, was already bouncing on her toes with excitement. Look, villagers, characters, do you think they'll sing? Oh, please let them sing. As if on cue, the villagers all turned in unison and burst into song. Welcome, witches, to our town, where pumpkins smile and leaves fall down. The harvest's here, the pie's begun. We're all so glad you've joined the fun. The witches stood frozen. Rowena pinched the bridge of her nose. Oh no, Hazel clapped politely. How lovely, they rehearsed. Thistle grinned. This is brilliant. Can we join in? I've always wanted a theme song. But before she could attempt a pirouette, the music stopped. The villagers froze once more, and from the far end of the square came the slow clip-clop of hooves. A horse appeared, a very grand horse, wearing a feathered hat. On its back sat a man in an unnecessarily shiny doublet, with a moustache so twirled it could have doubled as a corkscrew. He raised one hand dramatically. Ah, brave travellers, you have arrived at last. Hazel looked confused. At last? We only just... Hush, Rowena whispered. I think he's narrating. The man puffed out his chest. I, Prince Marmaduke the Magnificent, have awaited your coming, for our village is cursed, and only you 3 witches can break the spell. Thistle gasped with delight. Oh, we're heroes. Did you hear that, Rowena? Heroes, Rowena groaned. I was afraid of this. Hazel adjusted her spectacles nervously. What exactly is the curse? The prince leaned forward dramatically. Our pies no longer sing in harmony. There was a long pause. Rowena blinked. Your what? Our pies, the prince declared. They sing, of course, or they did. But ever since the curse, they only shriek off-key. The harvest festival is ruined. Hazel gasped. Off-key pies. That's dreadful. Rowena rubbed her temples. We're going to regret this. Thistle punched the air. I accept this quest. Chapter 4. The Village of Perfectly Peculiar People. At first glance, the village looked exactly like something Hazel might have knitted. Neat, colourful, and suspiciously free of mud. The cobbled streets gleamed as though they had been polished by particularly diligent mice. The thatched cottages lined up in perfect rows, each with matching flower boxes brimming with marigolds that never wilted. The air carried the faint aroma of cinnamon and wood smoke, but with none of the usual tang of manure or damp socks that Rowena insisted was realistic village air. "It's too tidy," Rowena muttered, squinting suspiciously at a passing wheelbarrow full of identical apples. Villages are never tidy. Someone's up to something. "I think it's lovely," Hazel said, beaming. "Look, even the pumpkins are smiling." Indeed, every pumpkin on every doorstep had a cheerful grin carved into it, each one identical to the next. Their triangle eyes twinkled faintly, as though lit by something more mischievous than candles. Thistle bent down to poke one. The pumpkin promptly sneezed, showering her boots with seeds. "Ha," she crowed, "these pumpkins are alive." The nearest villager, a woman in an apron so starched it looked capable of standing upright by itself, turned, froze in place for exactly 3 seconds, and then chirped brightly, "Good afternoon, dear witches. Isn't it a marvellous autumn?" Her voice was just a little too cheerful. Her smile was just a little too wide. "Marvellous indeed," Hazel said kindly, adjusting her shawl. "And how are you keeping?" The woman tilted her head, as if trying to remember. "I am keeping perfectly well. Would you like a pie?" "Always," Hazel said. Rowena caught her arm. "No." The woman raised a tray, revealing a row of pumpkin pies. They opened their crusty little mouths and immediately launched into song. Unfortunately, it was dreadful. One pie bellowed like a foghorn, another warbled like a strangled goose, and a third simply shouted "la la la" at random intervals. The overall effect was less heavenly choir and more barnyard catastrophe. Hazel clutched her chest. Oh, the poor things. They're completely out of tune. Rowena pinched the bridge of her nose. "I told you it was a curse. Singing food is never reliable." Thistle, however, was delighted. "This is brilliant. Can we adopt one?" As they wandered further into the square, the witches noticed more peculiarities. The blacksmith hammered endlessly at a horseshoe, but never quite finished it. The baker pulled loaf after loaf from his oven, each identical, each steaming just so. The children played hopscotch in perfect unison, chanting the numbers in rhyme, then freezing mid-jump until the witches passed. Hazel's brow furrowed. They don't seem very natural, do they? Rowena folded her arms. They seem written. "Written?" Hazel echoed. "Yes," Rowena said, scowling. "Every house too neat, every flower too symmetrical, every villager too rehearsed. It's all plot." Thistle grinned. "Oh, splendid. We've landed in a story where everything's set up for us. Imagine the adventures, the danger, the snacks." Hazel adjusted her spectacles nervously. "I don't much like the idea of being written." What if something dreadful happened? Something dreadful always happens, Rowena said flatly. Exactly, Thistle said, delighted. That's the best part. They paused at a stall in the market square, where an old man sold only gooseberry tarts. His eyes were wide, his smile wider, and his voice carried that same unnerving sing-song quality as the apron woman. "Gooseberry tart, dear witches," he asked. "One bite will change your fate." Hazel leaned forward eagerly. "Really? Change it how?" "Doom," Rowena said, grabbing her arm again. "It always means doom." The man's smile froze in place. He blinked once, twice, then repeated, "One bite will change your fate," as though his brain had jammed. "See," Rowena muttered. "Scripted. Utterly scripted." Thistle waved a hand in front of the man's face. "Do you think he's real?" Hazel gasped. "Don't be rude. Of course he's—" She stopped, because the old man hadn't blinked again. At all. Thistle said, tapping her chin. "If he's not real, does that mean the tarts aren't real either?" Only one way to find out. She reached for a tart. Rowena swatted her hand away. "Do not meddle with the gooseberry tarts." Hazel sighed. "But gooseberries are so seasonal." The clip-clop of hooves returned, echoing dramatically off the cobbles. Prince Marmaduke the Magnificent trotted back into view on his hat-wearing horse, moustache glinting in the sun. "Ah, my brave heroines," he cried, flinging out his arms. "Have you accepted your destiny to save us from the pie curse?" Rowena groaned. "No, we were just admiring your terrifying mannequins of villagers." "They are not mannequins," the prince declared. "They are my loyal subjects." One villager, standing suspiciously still, raised a hand. "Yes, we are loyal subjects," he said brightly, before freezing again. "See," the prince said proudly, "loyal." Thistle bounced on her toes. "I think we should help." Singing pies, loyal but creepy villagers, mysterious story magic. What could be better? Rowena muttered something about a quiet cup of tea and no cursed desserts. Hazel sighed. "Well, I suppose it would be unkind to leave them all like this." The prince leaned down dramatically. "Then you will help us." Thistle struck a heroic pose. "We accept this noble quest." Rowena scowled, but Hazel was already smiling fondly. "Yes, we'll help, but only after tea." Chapter 5. Rules written in ink and pie crust. The witches found themselves sitting on a bench in the square, sipping tea from a stall that appeared the very moment Hazel wished aloud for it. "See," Rowena muttered darkly, eyeing her cup. "That's not normal. Villages don't just conjure tea stands when you fancy one. This place is running on narrative logic." Hazel stirred her tea gently. Narrative logic sounds rather nice, though. You think of something comforting and... She waved her spoon vaguely. There it is. Thistle was delighted. She drained her cup and announced loudly, "I wish for a dragon." There was a pause. The villagers froze mid-step, as though considering the request. Then a faint rumble echoed across the rooftops. Rowena nearly spat her tea. "Oh no! No, no, no." Hazel clutched her shawl. "Please don't say you've conjured a dragon, Thistle." Thistle was bouncing on the bench like a child at a fair. "I might have. This is brilliant." Fortunately, or unfortunately, the rumble faded, replaced by the arrival of a pigeon carrying a small paper crown. It landed on Thistle's head with a dignified coo. "A dragon pigeon," Thistle declared proudly. "It counts." Rowena buried her face in her hands. "We're doomed." The witches decided to test the rules further. Hazel stood before a bakery window, gazing at the rows of identical loaves. "I wonder," she said softly, "if I ask for something unusual." She cleared her throat. "Excuse me, could I have a cranberry scone with lavender icing?" The baker, without missing a beat, pulled open his oven and produced exactly that, steaming, fragrant, and perfectly iced. Hazel's eyes went wide. Oh, how lovely. She bit into it, then froze. Her expression wavered between bliss and alarm. "Well," Thistle demanded, "what's it like?" Hazel swallowed carefully. "Tastes like plot." Rowena rolled her eyes. "Of course it does. Nothing here is real food, Hazel. It's all story-flavored." Hazel looked horrified. "Story-flavored? But it's delicious." "That's how it gets you," Rowena said grimly. Later, in the market square, Thistle experimented by shouting random commands. "Dance," she yelled at a group of children. Instantly they began to skip in perfect synchrony, spinning in a neat circle and chanting nonsense rhymes. "Stop," she yelled. They froze mid-hop. Thistle clapped her hands, delighted. "It works. The villagers do whatever you tell them if it fits the story." Hazel frowned. "That doesn't seem very kind." "Oh, lighten up," Thistle said, waving her arms. "Hop like frogs." The villagers dropped to all fours and began hopping across the cobbles, croaking loudly. Rowena hissed and grabbed Thistle's ear, tugging her away. "Stop meddling with story mechanics. Don't you realize how dangerous this is?" Thistle yelped, rubbing her ear. "Dangerous. They're having fun." "They're not having anything," Rowena said firmly. "They're written to do what they're told. And stories," she jabbed a finger into the air, "stories have rules. If you bend them too far, they snap back. And when stories snap back, people get eaten by wolves, or married off to enchanted frogs, or trapped in towers with dreadful wallpaper. Hazel shuddered. Oh, dreadful wallpaper would be the worst. That evening, the witches retreated to the inn. The sign outside read, "The story's end," and the innkeeper greeted them with the exact words, "Ah, brave travellers, I have rooms prepared for you." Rowena muttered under her breath, "Of course you do." The rooms were spotless, each with a fire already lit, and a pumpkin on the windowsill grinning cheerfully. A note lay on each bed in beautiful script. "Rest well, heroes. Tomorrow your quest begins." Hazel smoothed the note with a sigh. "It's all rather cozy, really." "Cozy now," Rowena replied. "But mark my words. Tomorrow the pies will probably attack us with cutlery." Thistle was sprawled across her bed, tossing the paper crown from the pigeon into the air. "Honestly, Rowena, you're no fun. We're in a magical story, with singing pies, enchanted villagers, and plot-flavoured scones. What could possibly go wrong?" The fire flickered ominously, as though the story itself was chuckling. "And that is where we'll leave our witches for now, tucked away in their quilts at the inn, cocoa in hand, and the storybook world shifting quietly around them. I hope you've enjoyed wandering with them through crooked cottages, goblin markets, and enchanted villages filled with singing pies and peculiar rules. But their adventure is only just beginning. The whispers of orchards, the secrets of the mill, and the mysteries of the story itself still lie ahead. So if you'd like to know what happens next, make sure to return for the next chapters of A Witch's Tale. Until then, may your nights be cozy, your dreams full of golden leaves, and may just a little bit of magic follow you into sleep. Good night.